Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is Tartaria and the Reset. I see a pattern. I know you're probably thinking, not another video on Tartaria and the Reset. Well, my perspective today is likely going to be very different from the perspective of most of these videos. Indeed, it's very different from the perspective that I used to have on the subject. So the entire thing is speculation, and I'm going to admit that. And so this is just another idea to explain what we see as these beautiful buildings. And to me, this is something that makes a bit more sense than what the typical explanation for these buildings is. Now, most of the time, when we see these beautiful buildings, people will attribute it to the millennial kingdom, when Jesus came down during the 1,000 years and physically reigned here on earth. And most people who see these buildings attribute it to that time period. And you know what? That could certainly be the case, and that's something that I did believe for a very long time. But after realizing that the Bible never says that the millennial kingdom will have beautiful buildings here on earth, I started actually seeing a pattern that seems to fit this better, and it is something that we do have biblical passages for. So let's go over my idea. When you hear the words Tower of Babel, ancient Babylon, Atlantis, antediluvian period, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, what are some things that come to your mind when you hear those? For me, the first thing that comes to my mind are that these were all ancient civilizations that either were archaeologically proven to have been very advanced, or that we at least speculate were very advanced. And they are all nations that were judged by God, sometimes directly by God, and other times he used other nations against them. So let's think about this. We'll start back with the biblical flood. It is highly likely that the pyramids that we see around the world, not just in Egypt, not just in Mexico, but around the world, are from antediluvian times. And obviously, it would have required very high technology that they shouldn't have had if we believe what they tell us historically, in order to make these buildings. And in fact, the book of Enoch does tell us that the Watchers, who hopefully you know who they are if you're watching my channel, so I'm not going to get into that, but the Watchers gave advanced technology to the people who were living on the earth. And indeed, it was actually during antediluvian times that Freemasonry was actually said to have been started, specifically Hermetic Freemasonry. And if you think about it, it seems to make sense when you see all of the beautiful megalithic structures that we just don't seem to have answers for. But even though there were these beautiful pyramids during this time, these beautiful megalithic structures, who knows what else they had during this time? How were the people who lived during this time? Genesis 6 verses 11 through 13 says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So here we have our first highly advanced civilization that was directly destroyed by God in judgment. So just because they had these beautiful buildings did not mean that the people themselves were lovers of the Lord or had beautiful countenances. It doesn't mean that at all. Yes, beautiful buildings, but remember the verse about the outside of the cup being clean and not the inside. Is that the case here? Certainly seems to be. God destroyed everything because of their own behavior, because of their hearts. So let's move on next to the Tower of Babel, which happens after the flood. We're back to having this very advanced civilization that decided that they were going to build a tower that reached all the way up into the heavens. And so you might be thinking to yourself, well, if this happened, and it wasn't really that long after the flood, how did they have all of this technology in order to do this? Well, it is very likely that some of that information was somehow saved somewhere. And you can actually read about this in Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne. It's a really good book, and I've mentioned it here often. I'm not going to get into it too much here, though. But let's read a little bit about the Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth, this is Genesis 11, 1-9. Now the whole earth had some language in the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So the people who were building the Tower of Babel, they lacked hubris. They were so highly advanced technologically speaking, but their hearts were hardened, and God destroyed them. Maybe not destroyed them in the way that we think of it. He destroyed their civilization, and he dispersed them throughout the earth. And many people might call that a reset. And that is another example of a reset or a judgment that was directly performed by the Lord himself. So next, let's move on to Nineveh, another beautiful, highly advanced city that we do see in the Bible, and we do see that God pronounced judgment on them, but they had a different outcome. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1-2 says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." Are you starting to see a pattern here? These beautiful, technologically advanced civilizations, they were corrupt. Now, thankfully, Nineveh repented, and the Lord spared them. But unfortunately, that is not the case with most of the judgments that we're going to be talking about today. In fact, this is the only case in which the people repented. It's not so with the rest of them. Next, we have ancient Babylon. The Hanging Gardens in Babylon were said to be one of the wonders of the ancient world. The entire city of Babylon was beautiful and advanced and was the pride of the kings. Yet Babylon was destroyed in judgment by God. Isaiah 13 verses 9-22 says, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light." Does that sound familiar? "The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell, and there wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So here we have the passage about the judgment of ancient Babylon. This glorious city that someone might look at it and say, wow, that looks like it would be part of the millennial kingdom, when in fact, no, that was part of ancient Babylon. And it was destroyed by the Medes. So this is the first example that I'm sharing with you today in which God used another nation to judge another nation. That's really great English. Used one nation to judge another nation. And again, the Medes destroyed ancient Babylon. Many people don't realize it, but Jerusalem was a beautiful, exquisite, advanced city. The temple was glorious. Jerusalem was judged by God. In fact, the entire book of Revelation is about the judgment on Old Covenant Jerusalem. And how was it destroyed? Well, some of the Jews, they also certainly were to blame, but it was also Rome. So yet another instance where God used one nation to judge another one, another advanced civilization where the people were found worthy of being judged. What about ancient Greece? Highly civilized ancient Greece, highly technological, beautiful art that came from there, beautiful architecture that came from there. And what happened to ancient Greece? Ancient Greece, renowned as the cradle of democracy and a hub for philosophy, literature, and science, experienced its peak between 500 and 300 BC. Despite its monumental contributions to architecture and culture, Greece fell under Roman control by 146 BC. The fragmentation of Greece into independent city-states, such as Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, played a significant role in its eventual downfall. Greece was not a unified nation until 337 BC under Philip of Macedonia, and this unity disintegrated after the death of his son, Alexander the Great. Alexander's expansive conquests left Greece relatively peaceful, but his death in 323 BC led to internal strife among his generals, who vied for control over his empire. This power struggle weakened the Greek city-states, making them vulnerable to external threats. Macedonia, under leaders like Antipater and his son Cassander, maintained some control over Greece, but persistent internal conflicts and the emergence of new leagues, such as the Aetolian and Achaean leagues, highlighted the region's instability. Meanwhile, Rome, steadily growing in power, began encroaching on Greek territories. The decisive moment came with Rome's intervention in Greek affairs during the Pyrrhic War and subsequent conflicts. The defeat of Macedonian and Greek forces in battles such as Kynocephalae, isn't that the dog heads? In 198 BC, I'll have to look into that. And the Achaean War in 146 BC cemented Roman dominance. Greece's fragmented political landscape and continuous internal conflicts facilitated Rome's conquests. Despite this conquest, Greek culture profoundly influenced Rome. The Romans adopted Greek social structures, military tactics, architecture, and even religious practices. Thus, while Greece fell politically, its cultural legacy endured, shaping the Roman Empire and, by extension, the Western world. So we have Rome, who worshipped other gods, was swallowed up, so to speak. Greece, who worshipped other gods, was swallowed up by ancient Rome. So, since God used Rome to judge both Jerusalem and Greece, does that mean that they were off the hook? No, they certainly were not. So here we have yet another civilization, again, highly advanced, highly civilized, likely had technology that we don't even know that they had. Yet, their hearts were hardened, and God judged them, and he destroyed their civilization. Rome did not have a happily ever after story. Let's read a bit about what happened to ancient Rome. Number 1, invasions by barbarian tribes. So again, we have God using another nation or another people group to judge this one. The most straightforward theory for Western Rome's collapse pins the fall on a string of military losses sustained against outside forces. Rome had tangled with Germanic tribes for centuries, but by the 300s, barbarian groups like the Goths had encroached beyond the empire's borders. The Romans weathered a Germanic uprising in the late 4th century, but in 410, the Visigoth king Alaric successfully sacked the city of Rome. The empire spent the next several decades under constant threat before the Eternal City was raided again in 455, this time by the Vandals. Finally, in 476, the Germanic leader Odoacer staged a revolt and deposed Emperor Romulus Augustulus. From then on, no Roman emperor would ever again rule from a post in Italy, leading many to cite 476 as the year the Western Empire suffered its death blow. Economic troubles and over-reliance on slave labor. We're just going to skim through that one. I will leave the links in the description box. We've got the rise of the Eastern Empire. Overexpansion and military overspending. Government corruption and political instability. Does that sound familiar to you? The arrival of the Huns and the migration of the barbarian tribes. So again, we have yet another nation coming in, or another people group moving in. The barbarian attacks on Rome partially stemmed from a mass migration caused by the Huns' invasion of Europe in the late 4th century. When these Eurasian warriors rampaged through northern Europe, they drove many Germanic tribes to the borders of the Roman Empire. The Romans grudgingly allowed members of the Visigoth tribe to cross south of the Danube and into the safety of Roman territory, but they treated them with extreme cruelty. According to the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, Roman officials even forced the starving Goths to trade their children into slavery in exchange for dog meat. In brutalizing the Goths, the Romans created a dangerous enemy within their own borders. When the oppression became too much to bear, the Goths rose up in revolt and eventually routed a Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens during the Battle of Adrianople. My pronunciation is probably horrible, in AD 378. The shocked Romans negotiated a flimsy peace with the barbarians, but the truce unraveled in 410, when the Goth king Alaric moved west and sacked Rome. With the Western Empire weakened, Germanic tribes like the Vandals and the Saxons were able to surge across its borders and occupy Britain, Spain, and North Africa. Christianity and the loss of traditional values. The decline of Rome dovetailed with the spread of Christianity, and some have argued that the rise of a new faith helped contribute to the empire's fall. The Edict of Milan legalized Christianity in 313, and it later became the state religion in 380. These decrees ended centuries of persecution, but they may have also eroded the traditional Roman value system. Christianity displaced the polytheistic Roman religion, which viewed the emperor as having a divine status, and also shifted focus away from the glory of the state and onto a sole deity. Meanwhile, popes and other church leaders took an increased role in political affairs, further complicating governance. The 18th century historian Edward Gibbon was the most famous proponent of this theory, but his take has been widely criticized. While the spread of Christianity may have played a small role in curbing Roman civic virtue, most scholars now argue that its influence paled in comparison to military, economic, and administrative factors. Because, of course, let's always play down the Christian influence, right? And then, of course, number 8 is weakening of the Roman legions. So, again, here we have yet another beautiful civilization that when we look at that again, we might see that and say, wow, that must have been part of the millennial kingdom, because look at the beautiful buildings, the beautiful structures. It was judged by God because, again, the beauty was only on the outside. Another fantastic example is Atlantis, which many people believe to be just a fairy tale, just a legend, but that I happen to believe was based on a real place, based on real history. And again, we have yet another example of an advanced civilization, so advanced, in fact, that its kings were Nephilim. They were demigods. So they have even more going against them. So again, we have yet another picture showing that just because we have this beautiful area that is just exquisite architecture and technology that we could never possibly even imagine, and even if they had a wonderful hierarchy or an order to their civilization, they were, by their hearts, judged. And yes, they were judged by God. The true story of Atlantis, the fabled lost city that may lie on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I always leave the links in the description box. It says in 360 BC, I'm just going to say BC, Plato wrote that Atlantis was once a powerful civilization, but the gods sent earthquakes to destroy the island nation when its people became greedy and proud. Now, I hope that as I am reading all of these to you and discussing these with you, that you are making connections to things that happened in our more recent past. Things like the earthquakes. For example, the San Francisco earthquakes. Sometimes there are judgments that are directly from the hand of the Lord, and yet there are others in which he uses nations to defeat other nations in his judgment. Atlantis, the story goes, was once a sprawling empire led by a powerful confederation of half-god, half-human kings. Yes, they were Nephilim. These kings conquered much of the Mediterranean, but when they attempted to conquer Athens, they were swiftly defeated. And it is very likely, I must say, that their fathers were the Watchers, and they likely had the technology that they had because it was handed to them by their fathers. This wasn't something that was bestowed on them by anything good or anyone good. This attempt, Plato said, caused the Atlanteans to fall out of favor with the gods. As punishment for their impiety, their kingdom crumbled, and the island at the center of it was swallowed up by the ocean. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. Plato wrote in Timaeus, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. And it is my very strong opinion that it was not the lowercase g gods that judged Atlantis, but that it was the Lord of all creation that judged Atlantis and caused these things to happen. So that brings us up to more recent time periods. We need to remember that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. he does not change. If he was judging nations, and the Bible tells us how he judged nations and why he judged nations, why would we believe that he would stop judging nations who were in direct rebellion against him? And could these judgments have been direct judgments or by other nations? Yes, I believe that it could have been either. And I believe that there have been more than one judgments since the canon was closed. In fact, what I read to you about ancient Rome, the canon was already closed at that time. Yet they were clearly judged. They weren't in the Bible because, again, all of that had already been written, but God does not change, and he will continue to judge nations that rebel against him. So could that explain the great fires that we know happened all over the world, which the strangest thing, all these great fires everywhere? Could it explain these melted buildings that we see all over the world that certainly do remind you of what is described as the day of the Lord? Are these all judgments by God? And this reset that happened, that did cover up all of this exquisite architecture that we see. Is it possible that the reset happened because this was yet another judgment by God, by yet another civilization that very possibly did not have their hearts on the Lord where they should have been? Ecclesiastes 1:9, I mention this verse all the time. I'm actually going to read Ecclesiastes 1 through 10. All things are wearisome, more than one can describe. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear content with hearing. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a case where one can say, look, this is new? It has already existed in the ages before us. Nations have been judged. Technologically advanced nations with beautiful architecture beyond our wildest imagination, they have been judged. We can't forget that. And I know that, it's lovely to think about the possibility that these were all part of a physical millennial kingdom here on earth. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there are no passages that say that that is what the state of the new earth will be like. Let's actually see what some verses do say about how we should be approaching life. Jesus said in Matthew 6, verses 19 to 24, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." And I am actually going to just enter into this conversation that I believe the same thing goes with materialism. And what I see when I look at all of these beautiful civilizations is that, yes, they were wonderful to look at, and it's amazing to think about how they were possibly built. But were they putting their hopes on materialism? Were they worshiping their technology? Were they worshiping themselves because of what they could do? Let's read some more verses about what the Bible has to say about materialism. 1 Timothy 6, verses 7 to 8 says, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content." Luke 12:15 says, "And he said to them, Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. 2 Corinthians 4:18. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Proverbs 15:16. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Proverbs 16:16. How much better to get wisdom than gold. To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. Matthew 19:21. Jesus said to him, If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. 1 Timothy 2, verses 9 to 10. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. So this is very interesting, because what we have here is they are telling us that all of this adornment is not what is proper for people who profess godliness, because we are not to seek materialism. We are to keep our eyes on the Lord. We are to keep our eyes on heaven. 1 Timothy 6:17. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Colossians 3:5. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Ecclesiastes 4:4. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity, and a striving after wind. You know, I often hear people commenting about the extravagance of some Roman Catholic churches and how it just doesn't seem to fit with what Jesus was preaching about humility. And to me, I think that's why it doesn't sit right with me to believe that all of these beautiful buildings, they're beautiful, but it doesn't seem to fit with what Jesus actually taught. Instead, what we do see are that the beautiful advanced nations, they were the ones that were not seeking the Lord. They were the ones that were in direct rebellion against him. They were the ones that were judged by him. So my question is, the most recent reset, or several of the resets that we have been exploring, is it possible that they did not come about after a millennial kingdom at all? But did they come about because that nation, that Tartaria that people often like to call it, and in fact it even could go with the nation of Tartaria as well, was it because they were judged and not because it was a physical millennial kingdom at all? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to support my channel, I will leave a link in the description box for my YouTube membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.